Welcome again. This week we're studying Chapter 6, The Memory of Our Eternity, and we will now start with guided meditation. So allow yourself to just take a moment to settle. And notice how our everyday experience is constantly changing, coming and going, evolving. And notice how the awareness that we are is ever present. It's the ever-present background of all experience. So we'll just take a couple minutes to come back to that awareness, come back to that fact of being aware that doesn't require any effort. It already is. Just allow yourself to rest into your being. Just allow experiences to come and go as they do. They come to pass. And keep returning to the fact of your being, which is perfectly aware. Just take another moment to be with the effortlessness of this awareness. And now let's take a couple deep breaths. We'll make space for anyone to share. If you have something to share from the meditation. And if not, we can get right into the reading. Spirit Song, you're muted. And then Aaron, you'll be next.
Oh, I didn't see anybody had their hand raised. I'm sorry.
No, he raised after you started talking.
Oh, okay. The words, it came to pass, or I don't know if it was past tense or present, but the words come to pass caught my attention. What if everything just came to pass? And we could see it like that.
Yes.
Be in the moment, but realize that it's only this moment, this came to pass. I don't know, that just touched me in such a deep way with lots of curiosity, but a little bit of insight, I think.
I'm glad you were touched by that. I get that. I'm touched by it too, and I get that from Byron Katie. That's what one of the phrases that she uses. It comes to pass.
Comes to pass.
Mm,
Mhm.
thank you.
Mhm.
Aaron?
I was just gonna make I was just gonna share that for me, your guidance into that meditation just is so valuable, because my mind doesn't yet remember to do that. But it's so helpful to come back into the awareness of what is the ground state. So thanks.
Mm,
Mhm.
you're welcome. Shall we begin the reading? Great. We have I think 6 sections this week, so we'll have just a few minutes of discussion in between each reading. Would anyone like to begin chapter 6?
I can start.
Great. And read until the stars, and then we'll pause.
Got it. Chapter 6, the memory of our eternity. How might we turn the understanding of our ever-present, unconditioned, and unlimited nature into our actual felt experience? Imagine the physical space of a room and add the quality of awareness to it. It is now an aware physical space, a knowing space. And now imagine that the aware physical space were to investigate its experience. If it directed its attention to the objects in the room, it would always find them appearing and disappearing. Even the 4 walls which seemed to contain it would appear and disappear in its experience. However, the aware physical space would have no experience of its own appearance or disappearance. In its own experience of itself, it would be ever present and unlimited. If we now remove the space-like quality from this compound of space and awareness, all that remains is dimensionless awareness. That is our self. We, awareness, have the experience of the appearance and disappearance of the sensations and perceptions that constitute our knowledge of the body and world, but we never have the experience of the appearance or disappearance of ourself. We have no knowledge of coming into being with the appearance of the body, or of ceasing to exist when the sensations and perceptions that constitute the experience of the body disappear. We cannot even say that we existed before the body or will continue after its death. Before the body, there is no before. And after the death of the body, there is no after. Even during the existence of the body, there is no time present in which awareness endures. We are not everlasting in time. We are ever present now. We are eternal. Jesus indicated this when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am."
And let's open it up to discuss. What did you notice? What sense are you making of this section?
When I read the last, that last little sentence, before Abraham was, I am, coming from a Christian background, I remember this one statement similar to that in the New Testament, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And how I had no concept of really the eternity and understanding in consciousness what that meant. And I was brought back to that passage when I read the conclusion of this little piece, that there is no beginning of time. Time is a man-made construct, but I've just really been spiraling in this beautiful understanding of the flow and the circular evolution of our being. But it's really, for me, just absolutely beautiful that I understand what that passage means in a very different, way.
Yeah.
It was a concept that was very ego-driven and very shallow. And so anyway, I feel like being conscious, you have a cheat code to the universe. I understand it. So I really chewed on that last little bit, and I am that I am. This says it all.
Yeah. Why do you all think that he invited us to imagine the space, being aware, and then said remove the space-like quality? What does that do for us? Or what did that do for you in your experience? Yeah, Aaron.
To me, space is as objectless an object as it gets. It's like it's already so ephemeral. And then even to sort of like to assign space a sense of awareness and then take the space away from it seems like it's a hack, or like a trick, or like a way, not a trick, but like a technique to try to point to this experience of awareness, which is simultaneously so obvious and simple and easy to understand, but also so paradoxically slippery. And so it feels to me like it's a really interesting technique to help us feel it, experience it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It seems like that to me too. It seems like I've heard a description of Zen being Zen is a finger pointing to the moon, and that just means, like, to me it means like it's a concept that points us in the direction of the truth. It itself isn't the truth, but the concept can get us going in the right direction. And then, like, to let go of the concept and keep going, you might end up at the experience of that truth. Was it helpful? Does it feel like using that pointer? Did it do something for you?
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that this might be one of the places, Spira Song, for you, that it was this one of the places that it was tricky?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, talking about the aware physical space didn't compute for me.
Mhm.
I couldn't figure out how to make that jive with what I've been coming to see for some reason.
Mhm.
Aware physical space. Maybe it's, when I'm out in the natural world, I feel the awareness of everything. Well, that's physical space. But sitting in my living room with things that are more inanimate, it's harder for me to compute that in my head, that this space is aware. I can see it being aware of my thoughts, but I also know that I am one with everything, and that means um, aware of all physical thoughts everywhere. So from that perspective, it makes more sense. I don't know, it just grabbed me in a strange way when I started reading that. There were several things that I went, what? Okay,
Yeah.
that'll make more sense as I go along.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and it's also possible that, I think one of his tools is to use a lot of different tools, to use a lot of different pointers. And so it's also possible that you don't need this pointer. It's like, I think if we're all trying to get up to the top of the mountain and we're all around the mountain, we might all need slightly different arrows. You know what I mean? So it's possible that this pointer doesn't resonate for you because you don't need it.
Mhm.
Mhm. Can I offer a little piece here? I wonder, somehow it just strikes me as like, it's actually such an interesting metaphor, or a little invitation. Like, if I imagine a room, what makes it a room is the boundary of the walls around it, the floor, the ceiling, and the walls. Well, it's like it's pretty easy to make a leap to like our bodies being the floors and the wall and the ceiling. Like, what's the difference? Like, we could call our bodies a room. It's the room that we spend most of our time in. We call it a body, but it's somehow I just had never I've never equated my body with a room. But in this context of studying and thinking about this metaphor and this practice, it's like, oh, that seems like not a very big leap to make, to just think about what's the difference between a room and a body.
Yeah.
And lungs are the table, and my pelvis is the chair over there, or whatever. It's like there's things in it. There's a lot of space in it also.
I guess I took it somewhere else. I was thinking of all the things in my apartment as like each one represented a content of my experience, a piece of my experience. And as I remove these pieces of furniture in my conscious awareness, in a meditative state, then I become emptier and emptier, and my room becomes emptier and emptier. So I kind of tied the physical objects in my space with the content of my experience. And they all do represent something, but they're locked in time. So I was trying to see this as a timeless, empty space. So that was my interpretation anyway.
Yeah, Neil, go ahead.
I'm stuck on the second paragraph from the bottom about we cannot say that we existed before the body or will continue after its death. Before the body, there is no before, and after the death of the body, there is no after.
Yeah.
I don't understand. We cannot even say we existed before the body. That doesn't make sense to me.
Hmm.
That's another one that tripped me up too.
Yeah. 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 I think what he's pointing to here, and this just comes from my experience of having listened to him a lot. I've heard him refer to this similar thing in other contexts. From the perspective of awareness, the direct experience of awareness, there's no time. We don't actually, what he says is, we don't actually experience time. We think that we experience time, but all we ever experience is now, and our experience occurring now. So I can experience a thought about what we call the past and an image of what we call the past, but it's always now. So I think that's all he's pointing to, is that our direct experience is actually timeless. But we kind of fool ourselves, we trick ourselves. You know, the veil is so convincing to seem as though there's time.
I'm trying to think of the difference of the unveiled and the veiled, and the way Ra describes the time, space, time, and how those reverse, so that we are here in some sort of more space like I feel like over there on the other side, the awareness is of being timeless, and that is for that part of creation. But here it is created with space-time, so we are experiencing those things, but I guess it's an illusion to go back and think of a past experience, because we're just drawing that up, I guess. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's like, I think it gets slippery, like, to say that time isn't real. Like, it isn't that time isn't real. It is a real experience. It's just that it also is an illusion. In other words, it's not what it seems to be. It seems as though we go progressing from one moment to another. And, I don't really grasp this either, because, like, oh my gosh, we're still in the 3D veiled, right, experience. But what all these mystics point to is, like, actually, it's all simultaneous. It just seems as though we're going boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom, ba boom. And I just said a thing, and before that you said a thing, but yeah. So anyway, I think that's what he's pointing to, is the illusion of time, and how when we return to our direct experience of awareness, we can kind of like pierce that illusion. And I have been able to pierce it to some extent with his guidance. Like, you can look up some videos on YouTube, or like where he's guiding people into that direct experience of seeing through the illusion of time, like how we're not actually experiencing a past.
I guess
You
it's
can't
our
go to the past.
brain, our physical receptor, trying to make sense of it when it doesn't make sense to the brain, and it's somehow moving past that thinking. And I don't think it's possible to think about it. I think it's something that is felt. Like you can't try to piece it together. And with room analogy, I know the next couple paragraphs kind of make it more easy to understand for me with the difference in years. So
what a great segue. Would you like to read the next section?
all right. Return to our aware physical space and imagine it taking 3 samples of itself. One 500 years ago, before the building. One 500 years ago, before the building it now fills was erected. 2, now. And 3, in 500 years' time after the building has been demolished. If the aware space were now to compare the 3 samples of itself, it would find them all identical. Nothing took place during the 1,000-year period of the experiment would have affected it in any way. It would not have aged, deteriorated, or become tarnished. It would always remain in the same pristine condition. Now return to our experience of ourself. If we were to sample our thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions at various stages of our life, each would be different. But if at various ages, we were to sample ourself, our naked being, before it is qualified by experience, we would find it always in the same pristine condition. Our self never experiences any change in itself. Divested of the qualities it acquires from experience, it is simply present and aware, coloring itself in all forms of experience, but never being or becoming anything other than itself. Nothing ever happens to ourself.
All right, let's open that one up.
So like Aaron's analogy of the body being the room, and the 1,000 years for the space in between the walls is our 100 years of being alive, and we have our view or our thoughts at 5 years old, 50 years old, and 100 years old, and no matter what, it's still going to be the same being throughout the 100 years, no matter what gets piled on top. Just like the room, you can bring in lamps and couches and everything and makes the room look different, and the room probably gets happier vibrations and things come on top of it, but in the end it's still the room itself no matter what happens. So thinking of our just like right before birth, what was that awareness like when people do the hypnotic regression, and in the womb, kind of like that pureness is what we're striving to get kind of back towards.
I think his example with the building and the time period, you know, as a human having a spiritual experience, humanity sees things so linearly, and that's just conditioning for me. That's the way I've always thought. So it is really to go above that and to see. That was a great metaphor for me, and the awareness never ever changes. Like that is the unchanging element in all of this. But I really did like that example that he set forth with the 1,000-year period in the experiment. And so I sort of see this montage of clips in my mind running really, really fast. I can see sand just changing the elements of the earth, and yet the awareness is there in that never changing form. You know, we've all seen those hyper fast videos of like land changing over time. but awareness has always been there. It never ages, it never tarnishes, it never deteriorates, as he said. It's always pristine. And that to me helps tie in the understanding that I am not a body. I am that forever now spirit. My body is like that 1,000-year experiment, but the space within that experiment, the unchanging, is who I am.
Yeah.
So I think it helped me go a little deeper into the I'm not a body. Concept. I don't know. I'm lost track. I can't articulate how I want to finish, but
Hmm.
I really did appreciate his example.
I feel like you just touched it so deeply that words disappeared.
I was like, whoop,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, Aaron. Oh, I can't hear you.
The little exercise of the 1,000-year span really does something interesting for me, where, again, if I sort of like toggle the metaphor back into like pretending my body is the room, but applying the same inquiry to it, it's like, I don't know if I'll be able to put this into words, but okay, well, okay, so if I'm sitting in this particular volume of space, I'm having this experience of seeing you all and having a conversation. If I scooch over here, I'm still having the same experience, but I'm occupying a different volume of space. And I guess what I get in touch with when I do this inquiry is like, it really points me to the dimensionlessness of awareness. Like, no matter where we travel and put our bodies, we still are capable of experiencing. And like, no matter where this hypothetical room that we're experimenting with, no matter where it got built, it still could have experiences in it. And in fact, you could argue that, you know, if, as long as it wasn't drastically different, the experiences would be exactly the same, even though, you know, the sort of coordinates in space would be different. And I'm just getting this sense of like, as I walk, you know, as I move my body through space, there's a fairly seamless sense of continuity of my experience. My experience doesn't change as I move from coordinate to coordinate. And it just gives me the sense that like, wow, awareness truly is dimensionless. Like, there's no place that there's no boundary between where it does exist and where it doesn't exist. Anyway,
Yeah.
there's a lot more I could say about it, but and I don't know if what I just said just even translates, but it was really neat. It's a really neat experience for me.
Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoy getting to touch it with all of you too. Like, oh. Yeah. How about we read the next section? Caroline or Spirit Song, would either of you like to read? Yeah,
I can
Caroline,
read.
thanks.
Imagine that the aware physical space were to look around itself at the objects in the room. Everything it saw would be limited. But if the aware space no longer gave its attention to the objects in the room and allowed its awareness to come back to itself, it would not find any limit there. It would find an edge to all the objects in the room, but none to itself. It would find itself open, empty, spacious. Likewise, we find a limit in either time or space to everything that we know objectively, but we find no limit in ourself. Even time and space are objects of experience, for they appear and disappear in awareness. In fact, time and space are never actually experienced. In the absence of thought, there is no experience of time, and in the absence of perception, there is no experience of space. Even in the presence of thought and perception, there is no actual experience of time and space. Time is deduced from thought, and space from perception. This is confirmed every night when we fall deeply asleep. In the absence of thought and perception, there is no experience of time or space. They are how the eternal, infinite nature of awareness appears when it's filtered through the prism of thought and perception. In our own experience of ourself, we, awareness, are unlimited or infinite. We do not become unlimited or infinite through effort, practice, or discipline. We simply recognize ourselves as such. And this recognition is not an extraordinary mystical experience. It is simply the recognition of the nature of ourself or being as it is now.
Let's discuss. Spirit Song, you look ready. You go ahead.
I don't know exactly how this fits, but it has been persistent with me from the earlier part when we were talking about the thought came to me of how I was taught as a child in the faith that I was raised in, that the body is the temple that this being lives in. I don't know that it would have been called holy because we were always trying to be more holy. I was always trying to do something to be more worthy, you know. But the concept of the physical temple, the holy temple that this being that I am, everything and nothing exists in, I compare with what we're talking about, the room, and then I get lost. So if anybody has any perceptions, I'm open to share. Yeah.
Did you want to jump in, Neil?
Yeah, I was thinking of, so my hand, and then I have a body, and the room saying my lamp, and I have the walls. So it's like I have the hand and I have a body, but the I is aware of the hand, just like the room says there's the object in the lamp. And then the four walls that contain the room is the body. I'm losing myself. But I guess it's like I have that body the same as the room is trying to say, like, I have the everything around me. So it's kind of just containing that pure awareness.
Does that click anything for you, Spirit Song?
Yeah, I wonder, somebody said earlier, and I see others kind of getting lost, like I'm feeling getting lost, if we're trying to capture with words what can't be captured. That's where we're getting hung up, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think
that's
it is helpful to allow it to keep just pointing us somewhere, to not try to stay connected to the concepts themselves, but to allow it to point to an experience, you know, which again is like part of the purpose for me of like pausing at the end of each section to just allow the experience, you know? Yeah. So I think you're right. As best you can, try not to get caught up in in any of it, even the experience of being caught up, like, oh, look, there's the experience of being caught up. Back to awareness. I'm aware of the experience of being caught up or something. That's my invitation to you.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying like what Neil just shared. Each time someone shares something, there is something that fills in another little piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
Aaron, did
feels
you
like
want to say? Oh, go ahead.
I
Complete
was
your
just gonna
thought.
say, I said fills in another little piece, which is kind of like how this feels today, like a puzzle with lots of little pieces, and I have some of them filled and some of them not, and it's not looking really clear yet, but it's coming little by little. Yeah. And each of us finds another little piece to put in the puzzle. Yeah.
You want to jump in, Aaron? You're muted again. No. Okay. We'll pass on. Great. Well, let's read the next section.
Oh, I wanted to add one other thing though on
Great.
that one. I think for me, this is why meditation is such an imperative tool on the path, is that is when that's when I feel I experience the timeless, spaceless, formless arena, and to get above the chattering mind, obviously, and to not be in that, as he said, the absence of time and space and perception and thought. But I think for me, that is a necessary ingredient in this capturing this whole concept or idea that he presents of being neither in time or space.
Yeah.
I feel like it's this direct experience to source where I can be free of all these boundaries and all these walls. That is to feel that real deep presence of I am everything.
Yeah.
Going from nobody, what is it? Joe Dispenza says, somebody to nobody to everybody. In form, I am somebody, and in this conscious path, I strive to be nobody so that I can then be everybody. But in that meditative state, all of these walls just dissolve, and I can feel into that presence of there is none of this or that.
Yeah.
Limitless. Yeah. Anyway, that's my little tag at the end there. I didn't.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, and I'll just say, as we get ready to read this next section, just offer the invitation. It's like he says at the end, we're not becoming unlimited or infinite. We're just recognizing ourselves as that. And so if there's, it's like kind of how Quo offers that pointing of like, anything that resonates, go with it, and anything that doesn't, just let it go. Because if you're finding that it's pointing you to what you already are, if it's pointing you to yourself, brilliant. If it's not, just let it roll off your back, because again, we're not trying to become what he's pointing to. It's what we already are. So Spirit Tongue, would you like to read the next section? And you're muted.
Oh.
You're muted, love.
Are we starting at sometimes it is said?
Yes.
I thought I was in the right place, but sometimes it is said in the traditional literature that our self, the presence of awareness, transcends experience. This is a true but somewhat misleading idea that suggests that our self is beyond experience and thus mysterious, unreachable, and unknowable. It is true that our self cannot know itself as an object of experience. At the same time, it never ceases to know itself, just as the sun never ceases to illuminate itself. Our self does not transcend experience in the sense of being beyond it. It is prior to experience. Awareness lies behind and is present in the midst of all experience. John Smith does not lie beyond King Lear at an infinite distance from him. He is the very essence of King Lear. Nothing could be more intimate, familiar, and well known to King Lear than John Smith. Even King Lear's most intimate thoughts and feelings are like strangers to him compared with the intimacy of the presence of John Smith. Describing ourselves as infinite and eternal may seem to imply that it is at a vast distance from the very ordinary, intimate, familiar self that we know as myself. Nothing could be more misleading. Infinite, when used in relation to our essential self, simply means that our self does not share the limitations of experience, just as the space of a room shares none of the limitations of the objects within it. And John Smith shares none of the limitations of King Lear's thoughts and feelings. Likewise, eternal does not imply that our self resides in some mysterious dimension of which we have no experience. Just means that whilst all thoughts, images, feelings, sensations, and perceptions continually appear and disappear, our essential self or being remains present throughout. Our essential self is the ever-present factor in all temporary, changing experience. It does not exist on the horizontal time dimension of time. It is the vertical dimension of being.
All right, let's open that one up.
Is his example of John Smith and King Lear, the actor, is it pointing that way? Is that what it, because I was a little
Yeah.
lost. Okay.
Yeah, he made this reference a couple
Yeah.
chapters ago of like
Okay.
there's an actor named John Smith
Right.
who's playing the role of King Lear, and then he gets lost in the role and thinks that he's King Lear.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we were still talking about that example.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was immediately struck with the image of like a cross on the end there of my deepest desire to live in the intersection of the horizontal and the vertical plane, to be that, and he said it right there. It does not exist on the horizontal dimension of time. It's the vertical dimension of being. So we live in this earth plane experience. But anyway, I like that way he encapsulated that idea.
Yeah.
Not easy to do, but being in the
Mhm.
world, but not of it. And he also mentioned on likewise, eternal does not imply that our self resides in some mysterious dimension of which we have no experience. I was kind of curious what you all thought that might mean to you. I don't know. I kind of think of the eternal mystery of the forever now as a mystery. So I kind of question that statement. To me, eternity does exist in a mysterious dimension, but that's my interpretation.
Yeah. What I make of it is that when we think that it's mysterious, there's a way that our minds can make it far away. We turn mysterious into a concept, unreachable, ungraspable, beyond me. And yes, there's a way that it's mysterious, but also it is me. So I think that's what he's pointing to. And of course, all words are going to fall short and not actually point to the thing. So, there's a way that anything we say is not true. And actually, that's one of the things that he says during his talk sometimes, like, if I were actually going to speak the truth, I would need to remain silent. So that being said, with that caveat, here are some words that might approximate truth. So anyway, that's what I think he's pointing to with, it's not mysterious. It means it's not far from you. It's not unreachable, ungraspable.
I just looked at mysterious as this cosmic wonderment of just grandeur and celestial. I don't know. To me, it's such a beautiful word that I don't have to know anything. I can just fall into the beautiful, clueless pillow of mystery that I know I am that I am. But if I want to know why anything, then I'm searching in an ego state. So anyway, mystery to me is a beautiful, it means something to me. So I was a little struck by his mentioning that eternal does not imply that our self resides in a mysterious dimension, but I see where you're coming from. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I would just offer again, if it's useful for you, just recognize, well, maybe that pointing isn't for you. Maybe that would do something for someone else. It would point them in the right direction. And if it doesn't resonate for you, let it go.
I loved right at the beginning there where he says, it is true that our self cannot know itself as an object of experience. At the same time, it never ceases to know itself, just as the sun never ceases to illuminate itself. I just thought that was so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Me too.
I think that's a good reminder for me, is that the sun just is, it just shines. And every time I look at the sun, it's like, that's the goal, just to be a shining light and no thing on top of it. It sounds like I'm so mad at Earth today. But I just think
Right.
that it's a physical way to bring yourself back to that.
That reminds me of that Hafiz poem. Do y'all know that one?
Oh yeah, you're saying what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really short. Let me just read it to you. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me."
Mhm.
Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky.
Yeah.
I love that. That's really been occurring to me lately too. Like when I work with clients, there's often, one of through the process of meditative self-inquiry, there's often this experience of like, whatever it is I wanted the other person to do, well, that's my job to do it. And there's often this objection that comes up that's like, why do I have to be the one to be the bigger person? And it feels like this like burden. And it's really like, the more that I move into it, like I've just been having this insight the past few days of like, it's really a privilege. Why do I get to be the bigger person every time? Like, really? I get to do it again? Wow. It's like such a, it's a flip. It's like such a privilege. I get to be the one who's compassionate or who's understanding or who's whatever. And that's just something for me to keep like striving for, because I'm not always there. Yeah, Aaron.
I want you to really feel free to just say this doesn't fit in the flow because it might be too heady. And that's totally fine. But when in the very last sentence, when he says it is, well, I'll read the last two. Our essential self is the ever-present factor in all temporary changing experience. It does not exist on the horizontal dimension of time. It is the vertical dimension of being. And my spidey senses tell me that he's actually pointing to something that's a metaphysical principle that has actual geometrical meaning there.
Yeah.
But maybe he's just making a distinction between, okay, horizontal. No, we're actually talking about something very different than that, perpendicular in concept to that. Does anyone have any insights into that?
Well, first I'll just say he does get into that a little bit more at the end of the chapter. So that may shed some more light on it too.
Great. Well, let's just hold it then. I'll just hold it until then.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay. Great. I think let's read the next section then.
Your turn.
I'm happy to read. It's my turn. Great. If anybody especially likes to read, you're welcome to. I'll read. Our essential self does not share the qualities or limits of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, and is therefore impersonal. Yet it is at the same time utterly intimate. The self pervades the body, but is not located in or qualified by it. It does not share the limits or destiny of the body any more than space shares the limits or destiny of the building in which it seems to be contained. It is intimate, impersonal, and infinite. This intimate, impersonal, infinite self, or I, is the only I there is. In religious language, it is referred to as God's presence. God's presence does not shine in an individual self, for there is no such separate individual self within which to shine. John Smith does not live in King Lear, for King Lear is simply an apparent limitation of John Smith. There is no personal self whose essence is impersonal and universal. There is no higher or lower, enlightened or unenlightened self. There is just the intimate, impersonal, infinite self, which becomes temporarily mixed with the qualities of experience and seems, as a result, to become temporary and finite, without ever actually ceasing to be itself. The self of every self is God's infinite self-aware being, the only self there is. The being we know as ourself is God's being. In fact, not even God's being, as if being were an attribute of an entity called God. Infinite being is not an attribute of anyone or anything. There is only intimate, impersonal, infinite, self-aware being. It is referred to as God in the religious traditions, awareness or consciousness in spiritual circles, and in ordinary language, I. The person who embarks on a search for happiness, enlightenment, or God is like King Lear, traveling the world in search of John Smith. They are looking for their own being, the experience of happiness. The light of being or God's presence shines in each of us as the knowledge I am, the sense of being myself, or simply the feeling of being. One who turns towards their own being will be divested, usually gradually, but occasionally suddenly, of all their acquired limitations, and will sooner or later stand revealed as infinite, impersonal, self-aware being. That is the essence of prayer or meditation. So I can, go ahead, Neil.
Sorry, I was just thinking with the very first sentence, first two sentences, our essential self does not share the qualities or limits of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, and is therefore impersonal. Yet it is at the same time utterly intimate. I got the image of the like near-death experiencers when they leave the body and they have the full 360 awareness, and it just is that pure love, joy feeling. And I'm thinking like you continue on, and as a soul, there's still, I don't know, like a individual sense of being yourself. And I'm thinking, is that the same thing? Like, is when we pass on and we're out of the body, is that a similar feeling to what they're trying to get at? Does that make sense?
I mean, I think so. I think that part reminds me of a quote that I shared, I think a couple weeks ago now, and I think many of you weren't here for that study, and it's from Ra. So Ra says from session 4, there is no polarity, no right or wrong, no disharmony, but only identity. And I think that identity is the same thing that Rupert is pointing to, the seeming limits that we can inhabit. Like I seem as though I had a beginning and an end. I seem as though I have these edges. But only that's only the self leaning in towards those seeming limits, but it doesn't ever impact the self. So I think as the limitations fall away, there is that intimate, impersonal self that remains. I don't know if that ended up kind of pointing towards an answer to your question.
Like King Lear were to die and oh my gosh, I've been John Smith the whole time, I forgot. It's the same process that happens after death, but we're trying to attain that while living, I guess.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the path of self-realization. But I also think that even if we don't attain that, the experience of self-realization, like we can't escape it, that's where we're going. I think we're just, those of us on this call and in TOTOH are accelerating Earth School because that's what we're interested in.
Think of our just being born and in our culture saying like the experience of seeing a ghost or a fairy as a child and saying no, no, no. But in like Tibet, kids are born and they just start meditating immediately. So I wonder, it's just for our Western brains, this is just a huge like unpacking of everything we've been told.
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder for our like years of build up. And I wonder if it's harder for, I guess everyone's different, but if it's easier for like a younger kid to get this if you're able to explain it because they don't have as much experience. I'm wondering. No.
Yeah, Aaron.
I was laughing when you filled me in that you had mentioned a couple weeks ago the reference to the session that you just said about from the Law of One, because I just pulled that up to say that. I get from that what we just read, that's exactly what I was getting, is when Ra says there is only identity. That's precisely what Rupert is pointing to here, just using different language. So that's funny that you already shared that and I just missed out.
And I had an image of along the way the sun trying to turn itself off like a light switch. No, that doesn't happen. And I'm feeling that in the sense of the radiance of the light of all of our beings. Sometimes things get in the way of the one who's looking, watching, and they can't see the radiance because something's blocking their vision. Or the person feels like somebody pulled the light switch and their light's off, but it's not ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love that image. So that the experiences pass between us and the sun, but it never stops shining. Yeah.
Right.
So it seems as though that happiness and that peace come and go, but really they just become obscured because our attention is focused on something else. Yeah. And one thing that I'm really getting from this chapter is how it might have always been there and I just didn't grasp it in the same way before, but going back to the limits, and like our being doesn't contain those limits. I'm just really getting that in a new way, that like our mind through, and I like how he breaks out like the thoughts and perceptions, and that like thoughts break things out into apparent time, and perceptions like of the body break things out into apparent space. Like we create these limits, these apparent limits. And so like there seems to be, the 10,000 things. There seems to be like a window and a me and a dresser and a wall and they're different things. But they're all made of the same infinite knowing. So there's not actually discrete difference between them. And actually, like Aaron and I had an experience like a year or so ago of watching coals like all in the bottom of a fire, and like all these different little coals. They were discrete things, but then the fire had been dying down, and we could watch the heat waves pass from coal to coal. And like they were all just one coal, kind of. They were one vibrating experience of heat expressing itself or whatever. And yeah, that's just something that's kind of standing out to me, is like, oh, the limits aren't real. The limits are illusory.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like we were talking about time before, like it seems like I'm saying a thing now, and before now, Aaron said a thing, and before that, Spirit Song said a thing. It's like, they're like broken out into these limits. Like there's a little box, and then there's a little box. And what if it's just all one something?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I got the thought of like, this is what fourth density is when we become the social memory complex of one unified earth being, but that happens through the individual realizing itself to not be the individual, but to be the essential I am. And once everyone realizes that, hopefully in the next, not couple hundred years, but as soon as this like this is what fourth density is awakening to that I am. So this just, I don't know, it just saw like people reading this, and that's the light, the connected web of humans that goes off, is that this right here, this book, this awareness. And that's how you get to become an embodiment of love and understanding all the everything else that doesn't make sense, is that you just love it and the negativity just is. So I think that it all ties in to where we're supposed to be going. So
Yeah.
I like the last paragraph too, when it talks about like some people suddenly get the kind of feeling, and others it's gradually. So I guess the ego, is you're not getting it yet. And it's just I don't know, like how to let the ego be nice, or like recognizing the ego in that moment and just saying like, oh, it doesn't happen suddenly. Or so, but that it's like a paradox of having to meditate and think about it and work on it, but you're not supposed to think, it just is. I don't know, there's a lot of like, I feel like I'm constantly recognizing anger and judgment of something that triggers me, and then I'm having to work back towards it. But I guess, as it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. A year ago, I wasn't even aware of this I am, and now I'm here. So in 3 years after reading this and talking about it, it'll just make sense.
Yeah.
So
Will anybody care to read the last section? Aaron, thank you.
The name I, or the knowledge I am, refers to the element of experience that is unchanging and unchangeable. It is open, without resistance, to all experience, and yet cannot be harmed. It is never enhanced or diminished by any particular experience, however pleasant or unpleasant. Our being is always in the same pristine condition. It does not need to be purified or perfected. It never appears or disappears. It does not move or change. It does not grow old, sick, or tired. All experience is added to it and removed from it, but its basic nature never changes. Being never disappears or dies. Being is indivisible. It cannot be divided into objects and selves. Everything and everyone borrows its apparently independent existence from it, without ever actually becoming an object or an entity in its own right. This impersonal, unlimited, indestructible, indivisible, self-aware being fills our body as the feeling of being myself, and shines in the mind as the knowledge I am. It shines in the world as the isness of things. The being in all beings is the same being. We share our being. Perception refracts impersonal, infinite, indivisible being into an apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, and thought gives them their names. Love is the experience of our shared being. When we love another person, we feel, to a greater or lesser extent, that the separation between us dissolves. Love is not a relationship. It is a vertical intervention of reality into the horizontal dimension of time, which is characterized by the subject-object relationship. Love is the collapse of this relationship. It is the end of the apparently separate self or person. It is the taste of eternity. When we long to love or to be loved, we long not for the person or the relationship, but to be divested of everything that makes us feel separate, temporary, limited, and confined. We long for the freedom of our true nature. We long to return to our original unlimited being. We long for love above all else, because the memory of eternity shines in each of our minds, irrespective of the extent to which it may be veiled by experience. Indeed, our longing is love itself, filtering through this veil. We all long to be returned to our original nature, whether we realize it or not. All that is necessary is to take the thought I, or the feeling of being myself, and allow it to draw us inward, as if the self were constantly saying to itself, "Turn toward me, and I will take you into myself."
Yeah, and just for the sake of time, let's go ahead and open this up. And I just want to point to that paragraph that kind of expanded on what you were pointing to earlier, Aaron, the horizontal dimension of time, which is characterized by subject-object relationship. So I think what he's pointing to is, I think he is pointing to something that is a metaphysical truth. But also, I don't know. I don't know whether that's intentional for him, whether he's in touch with that. But I think he's pointing to the horizontality kind of like creates the breaks of like, the limits, like here's this and here's that. And there's a relationship between the two. No, it's actually, whoop, they're one. So that's what I think he's pointing to.
Mm-hmm.
So just for the sake of time, anybody else have any final comments?
Might be a little longer than just one comment, but
I'm personally happy to go a little bit past the hour. Yeah.
I get caught up on like the grief, the intensity of grief, and the awareness being the awareness, but that just truly like filling every part of my body, like just being pulled down by grief. And then I think about the higher density beings that are the brothers and sisters of sorrow, and they've been unveiled, but they feel this sorrow for creation. So there's still feelings attached when you're unveiled. Like I guess you can still feel sad, but I guess the more normal state is peace and happiness. So I just, and thinking of, Jesus on the cross with pain and those extreme, intense emotions, is it like, okay, I am the awareness of the pain and the nail going through my hand. Like I'm aware of the pain. And I guess that lessens it. Like it's the intense emotions and physical pain, I guess, is where I get kind of held up on how do we move past those to the awareness.
Yeah. Well, I'll just point to, I think the clearest way that he pointed to that was at the end of one of the recent chapters. Let's see if I can find it right quick.
Is it on page 50 in the book, Peace and Happiness Are Not Even Qualities of Ourself? Is that
I
where?
was actually looking for page
Oh.
31.
Oh, okay.
So he says, the unqualified, unconditioned, aware being that shone clearly in Moses, the Buddha, Jesus, Meister Eckhart, Ramana Maharshi, and many others as the knowledge I, or I am, the feeling of being, or simply the sense of being myself, is exactly the same aware being that shines presently in each of us. The only difference is that their essential being was not eclipsed by the content of experience. Experience had lost its capacity to take them away from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just from that pointing, what that points me to is like, Jesus, I imagine, was able to experience sadness and suffering and the pain in his hands, but it didn't limit his experience of himself. His self was still experienced as infinite and eternal and spacious enough to hold sadness and pain, and I do think eventually, like the densities that we go through and the evolution, the evolution of our of consciousness, of identity, is resolving the limits. But I think, we don't fully lose our limits, lose those limits until, I don't know, the end of seventh density, or I don't know exactly when, but right, we're always still working with some sort of seeming limitation that obscures our being to some extent.
Isn't there something that I don't know if the pain actually felt different for Jesus, but even like as that was happening, he was still, giving forgiveness and love to
Right.
beings around him, because he knows that it's the creator nailing the creator, and it's just not even a concept at that point of being
Right.
separate. I
Yeah.
think once in that, you don't even see separateness.
Yeah. Well, and I think that at the bottom of page 60, where Rupert says, indeed, our longing is love itself, filtering through this veil. I mean, I think grief is in some way a longing. It's a longing for connection. It's a longing for peace. And when we realize, when we can realize that grief itself, like all, and anger and all of it is a longing and is love itself, then yeah, I think a lot of the suffering falls away. It can't veil the sense of separation anymore. It's just an experience that comes to pass,
Mm-hmm.
Like a blissful love, like I'm so blissed out that I'm feeling grief. Like, wow, this is incredible. Like this grief is just like the ability to feel this grief is blissful, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that it's an opportunity to continue to choose oneness, like, because I think that's what the limitations are for. That's why we come into the veiled environment, is to get to choose again and strengthen our faith and strength, like I think. So it's like,
A simple-
wow, this weight is making me so
Yeah.
strong.
Yeah, I had
Go ahead.
a simple statement that just guides me is love means everything is okay. And I love the simplicity of that for my soul growth. Love is expansion and, limitless possibilities, and it's shared energy. It's not keep and take, it's give away. But when I understand the true state of neutrality through the suffering and through all the challenges and seasons of life, I always come back to love means everything is okay. And that helps
I
me a
love
lot.
that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. I used to say it was the greatest power, but it's the only power.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, friends, shall we close or any final comments?
This was deep and rich. I'm grateful
Mm.
for sharing.
Yeah.
Me too. So grateful for all of you to get to touch into the power of this, the good news of all of this, right? To keep touching into like, oh my gosh, like keep letting it blow our minds. I love it.
I kind of think of this has been a big, like I always use the analogy, I guess, of a spiral, but he comes back to the same nugget of wisdom, but he presents it in different ways. But each of the layers in this spiral, this evolutionary spiral is rich, just like Spirit Song said.
Yeah.
And by the way, Spirit Song, I love your voice. I could fall asleep to a book that you narrate. I love your voice, and I wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That is, it is my perception and my understanding through my life that is one of my gifts to use when I do healing work. It is not just what I'm channeling, but the energy of my voice. I don't fully understand it, but that's part of Spirit's song that I've been assigned this lifetime. That's the only way I know to look at it.
Thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
Just find it fascinating that it could happen suddenly. So just got to be on our toes, and it could just
No more limits.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a juicy space. We don't want to leave.
I know. Nobody said goodbye. We're just sitting
Yeah.
there basking in the glow.
I'll call it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Bye. See you soon.
Yeah.